Welcome to the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. I'm your host, FoodTech marketing expert Megan Thomas. FoodTech Stories features the leaders pioneering new approaches to technology, collaboration, and storytelling in the food tech and ag tech space. Food and agriculture are changing, and fresh ideas and leadership are needed to sustainably feed the growing global population. Join us every other week as we talk to a founder, operator, or visionary in food and agriculture. Today's episode is about the impact of mis and disinformation on consumer food choices. And I have two guests with me here today. Connie Diekman, who's a Master's of Education, RD, and a former president of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And then also Cami Ryan, PhD, who's a senior business partner, industry affairs and sustainability for Bayer in Canada. Ladies, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
I'd like to start off with you, Cami. And the first question is, what led you to become interested in science and nutrition-related communications?
I got a long history in agriculture and food production, so I've been involved in that biz for quite a while. It's all connected. When we think about things like misinformation or communication, there's a lot of overlap. You can't talk about agriculture without talking about animal welfare. You can't talk about animal welfare without talking about livestock production. It all kind of comes together. I think it was a very natural process that I ended up connecting with Connie and others in that vocation. But really, I'm very passionate about mis and disinformation in any space related to food and agriculture. So that's just what's driven me.
And how about for you, Connie?
It goes back a bit. I worked in TV here in St. Louis for a period of time, and it was a real education. I would begin to speak, and the producer would be like, wait a minute, can we go back and explain that so the listener will understand what you're talking about? And it was at that time that I went back and did my master's in counseling so as to really put together that where are people and how do we share something that's going to be meaningful for them. And it's just evolved ever since then.
I think it's interesting to think about understanding human behavior and how people process information and then think about communication. We don't always do that. For me, I find that to be a very intriguing intersection. So it sounds like you both took different paths to get here. So based on your experience, and I'll go back to you, Connie, here, how do consumers rely on information when they're making food choices?
It's multifaceted, at least in my experience as a dietitian. People very definitely want to do what's the best for their family, so that's their driving priority. What happens from there is where the confusion can come in, because they will look at all the information that's out there, which is overwhelming, and then they will begin to focus on who's the most trustworthy? Who do I feel cares about me and is not just telling me what I should do? Those factors are, in my mind, key as we look at what we do. We need to understand it's not about spewing all the science we know. It's about establishing that relationship so that then they feel comfortable and maybe understand why a certain food choice is better for them and their families.
Cami, do you have anything to add?
I've learned, and often the hard way, I've been engaging in communication around agriculture for 25 years. I've learned that I didn't always do it right, and I still make mistakes. I think that that's part of it. It's that human component in all of us. We're hopelessly flawed in a lot of ways, but focusing, like what Connie says, is what's helped me revolutionize how I talk about the science without losing an audience or someone in conversation is focusing on the relationship. In my head, I always prioritize that first, because then I think that that really changes my language and my approach to things. It's my guiding star. Focusing and thinking to myself, it's a conversation. It's not a conversion. And I think we sometimes go into these conversations thinking, we got to win this. No, you 100% do not have to win this. The best case scenario coming out of it, you have a new friend. What's wrong with that? That's great.
Right. Communications and marketing for many years was about the megaphone. What can we shout out to our potential consumers or other constituents? And how do we educate them in a way? And it was a very one-way conversation. So the idea of having a conversation or a relationship, whether that's in person or in a digital setting, I think is exactly right. So is there anything about how consumers rely on information for making food or nutrition choices that's really changed in a fundamental way in recent years?
The trust piece is way down and confusion is way up. People are bombarded and they can't decipher what is the right path, which of course is what's led to all of this misinformation proliferation. It becomes the way to get followers on social media. It becomes the way for the individual sharing it, feel like, aren't I good? I have 100,000 followers. Look at me. But the poor consumer is then left with, I don't know who to trust. You can't have a conversation when your mind is closed because you fear misinformation. The environment has changed significantly. Yes, I often allude to a great deal of it since COVID issue, but it started even before that. The confusion was really reigning.
Social media has radically changed how we interact as human beings. It's so great in so many ways. Like when I lived down in the US, I loved being able to connect with my kids and grandkids. 100%. It's wonderful. Social media has made it easier for credentialed nutrition experts and dietitians to kind of connect with the consumer in different ways. But it has also opened up this pathway for unqualified gurus to kind of move in there and spread misleading information. They're not prioritizing your health. They're prioritizing attention so that they can monetize that attention and they can gain in that way. This whole economy operates below a level that we could actually really see it. So as consumers, that contributes to that confusion that Connie talks about. We don't understand how that economy works. And if we did understand it, maybe we could operate in it a little bit better and be able to test the boundaries and maybe check into things differently. But we don't know how it works. Misinformation is a problem. Uncredentialed people are a problem. But also there's this thing called digital and media literacy. We do not know or understand how that space works. So we don't know how to navigate it. How do you know how to navigate it if you don't have a map?
Professionals who carry a credential, my RD, we are held to a different standard than those who do not have that. The Federal Trade Commission makes it very clear what we can do. And obviously, there's also our code of ethics that dictates we speak to the evidence, not to, I believe this, therefore it must be right. In some ways, it's totally different, but in some ways, it's similar to what Cami alluded to. People don't realize there are guardrails. Of course, it seems like it's a wild, wild west, but there are guardrails around what some of us can say in social media, and that makes it harder to compete with the promises that sound absolutely wonderful, but they're based on one study.
So many directions we could go in here. I think that everything you mentioned, I would imagine, is only going to accelerate as AI, generative AI, is adopted broadly in communication. So the ability to simply get as many messages out there as possible is going to become substantially easier than it was even a year ago. In the face of that, I love to talk about solutions, as I'm sure that you've thought long and hard about crafting different approaches. I'd like to first dig in a little bit on the work you did around your paper and to define also for listeners misinformation and disinformation and what sets them apart.
This is a pretty important distinction because I find that a lot of people just kind of interchange these words, but there is evidence that actually backs up that they are defined differently. And when you at least even understand that piece of it, it helps you to kind of understand better that economy that lies below the surface where we can't see it. Misinformation is defined in the literature as inaccurate or incomplete misinformation, and this can mislead through an honest mistake, unconscious bias, negligence. Disinformation, on the other hand, is qualitatively different. It's a created and purposeful development of false information, and it is designed as part of a sophisticated deceit process with intended outcomes, whether it's to generate likes or to actually turn it into dollars. I view disinformation really is a product with a market. People are intentionally putting it out there so that they can gain value from it in some way, shape, or form. It's a product that is created and traded on this invisible economy.
Well said, Cami. The thing that I tell my students, or semester's over, so that I told my students always, is disinformation is that intentional sharing of inaccurate information. And when you see that, that's your opportunity to provide, well, let me look at this from what the science shows as standpoint. Not that misinformation isn't that opportunity, because of course it is, but the disinformation, as Cami said, that Real planned sharing of inaccurate information is the one that I've really kind of pushed my students to work to counteract so that we can show credible evidence-based information, not the planned misinformation.
And certainly these challenges go far beyond the subject matter areas we're speaking about today. I do have a question. You've made the distinction between misinformation and disinformation. Is one of those inherently worse than the other, or do they create problems in just kind of unique ways?
They're both a problem because it leads to the confusion piece. All consumers are susceptible to that.
It's profit driven. And when I say profit, that can look different, right? It can just be attracting likes or clicks. I want to expand upon what Connie said. Number one, I feel like we need a code of ethics. Glad that the RDs have that. But the piece that's disappointed me most in my space where I work with plant geneticists and agronomists and people across the agricultural industry, these are really knowledgeable experts. They are credentialed, but it's really disheartening when you watch someone's behavior online where they're prioritizing getting attention over authentic communication about not necessarily the facts, but doing it authentically in a way from a position of knowledge and expertise rather than just trying to get attention. And this is that human component, Megan. We talked about it earlier. We often get sucked down that trap pretty quickly. That sometimes really disappoints me.
And you're saying people who work in the field of science maybe have a different persona when they're online.
And sometimes it's a push to have that persona. We used to always talk, and I think it's worse now than ever, publish or perish in the research arena. And now, given the proliferation of journals, Cami and I have talked many times, many of them that are all about profit and not really the science. There is this push on researchers and scientists to publish. There are not the boundaries that there used to be as it relates to, does it reflect the evidence? Is it credible? Should it be published? You can pretty much, Cami, correct me if I'm wrong, publish anywhere, anything you want.
You don't have constraints, meaning that at one point, if you wanted to counter an editorial piece in a newspaper, you had to write the letter in, and maybe if you were lucky, they publish it in the paper. Now you can just post it anywhere. The other problem we have is we've got this online space and the publishing space itself, like scientific academic publishing space, scholarly space, has completely revolutionized with online. Of course, you have a bunch of journals that come up that aren't peer-reviewed. There's good and bad science published in those pieces too. It's not just bad science, but it's muddying the waters. So it makes it difficult for young scholars to even understand, should I publish here? Is this predatory? I don't know what this is.
What types of information do you believe should be peer reviewed?
Any study that is going to go for publication should have peer review.
Interesting. I think we've done a great job of uncovering many of the challenges out there. There are many, to state the obvious. I do want to give some attention to the paper you recently authored, was published in the Journal of Nutrition. What were the key takeaways from the publication?
The big one was we really focused a lot on the critical thinking piece. Critical thinking is a skill that has diminished in our educational system, as Cami alluded to before, from K on all the way up. I will admit I unfortunately see it in graduate students that the critical thinking isn't there all the time. So we really tried to emphasize the importance of assessing what you see, what you read, what you hear. And then by providing a few tips in the paper as well as to how to work with that client so that you can not only hear them appropriately, but you can respond to them in a trust and meaningful way. I hope we conveyed it's a skill that is achievable by food scientists, nutrition professionals. We just all need to take a little time to put it back in our repertoire.
I think a great piece of this article, number one, you're getting two people that have come from two different kind of related but different disciplinary perspectives. And I think sometimes that solidifies things in a different way and kind of gives a little bit of nuance to what we're talking about. But the big piece of all of this, and this is playing into the world we live in now, we've got short attention spans. People are begging for maps or decision trees or whatever as ways to navigate around this. What we tried to achieve in that article was some visual pieces that literally registered dietitian or young scholar could print out and pop on the wall and just have it as a reference piece.
Those sound extremely helpful. What other tips or other insights would you like to highlight?
We have to get out there and communicate what the science says and what that means to you as a consumer. We can't wait, or we can't assume someone else will do it. And when I say we, I don't just mean dietitians. I mean our ag partners, the researchers. We all need to be able to translate that science in a manner that the consumer then goes, got it. And my hope would be that as we do that more often and effectively, then as the consumer sees some of these crazy things that are out there, they're going to go, wait a minute, that is contradictory to what I heard over here. Let me go back and compare the educated response with the influencer response. And hopefully then they'll start to understand what the science has said and be able to ignore the other.
Do you think, Connie, there's an opportunity for the science-based RD community and the influencer community to be better integrated and to actually leverage the power of high follower counts and an audience, but to provide more scientific information?
I would like to hope there is. There are some RDs who are influencers, so we do know that it can be done. Whether we can pull in some that have truly some opposite viewpoints that are not grounded in evidence at all, I don't know. But I do think it goes back to, Cami called it the conversation. I talked about the relationship piece. We can't be attacking those who are speaking with mis or disinformation. We need to be providing the evidence in a friendly, positive way. The attack piece isn't going to work. And I think that's the temptation, of course.
I also think that there is this whole notion, the culture of science itself, it doesn't matter what discipline you're working in. There is a reason why they call it the ivory tower, because science removes itself intentionally so that it can observe things. This is what you want to be as objective as possible. That whole culture, faced with this kind of social media driven world and people wanting information now and they want it translated quickly, that goes against that culture. When I see that kind of merging, I think there's something, to Connie's point, we got to learn to translate better, and we can learn some things from out there in the influencer world about how to communicate in a way that really resonates with broader audiences. But we got to get out of the ivory tower. Scientists my age, that's not how we were trained. If we have the young scholars coming up, young scientists getting trained in communication techniques that resonate or align with the current world we live in. And my hope is too, maybe not in my lifetime, that we're going to get a little further along there, because you can find ways where the science integrity stays intact, but you can communicate it in interesting ways. And we're seeing that. And AI may be something that can help us, not just hinder us, but can help us.
Thanks for joining us today on the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. Be sure and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform and keep an eye out for our bi-weekly episodes. I'm your host, Megan Thomas, founder of Ladris 17. FoodTech Stories is edited by TJG Media.